Okay, 2 seconds, guys. Bear with me there. Perfect. Cool. So those of you that are listening in, welcome to tonight's mastermind. We're just going through training intensity tonight. So how hard should we train? I think it's a useful subject to go to, especially kind of after Christmas, that sort of thing. It's useful to think about sort of training intensities that we need to do. So to start off with, we're going to talk about adaptation. What do I mean by adaptation, guys?
Doing different stuff as you progress.
Potentially, yeah. Potentially that could be a method of generating adaptation, yeah.
Is it adapting what you're doing in terms of so that your body doesn't get used to it, so that it does start to further develop in your workout and in your training? Because I think you can become accustomed to you just keep doing the same thing all the time.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. So sometimes we need a little bit of a different stimulus in order to generate that adaptation. So we need to do something that we're not used to. Give me an example of an adaptation. What are we trying to do? What are we trying to achieve?
To get stronger. So I guess if you couldn't do a push-up, you could start off by doing it off of a table or something, and then you can adapt it to go lower and lower until you can do it on the floor.
Yeah, so you're talking there about kind of progressive overload.
Okay.
So that's you kind of moving lower and lower. So that's really good. You're a step ahead of us there. But see what you said at the start, getting stronger. Just that bit, that's the adaptation that we want to get, right? We want to, our body, we're trying to make our body adapt to the stress, and the adaptation that we want is to get stronger when we're doing resistance training. Yeah, that makes sense. Can anybody think of any other adaptations your body might make in response to resistance training, or anything else? Any other examples of adaptations? It's not stuff that we are consciously changing. It's your body's response. It's your body changing, adapting to what we do. So what are some other adaptations?
Could it be that your muscles get bigger?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Therefore you're doing the same thing as the other lady said, doesn't make any difference.
Exactly. So yeah, muscles get both stronger and bigger. Yeah. So that's another really good example of adaptation. And generally speaking, that's the main reason that we're there doing our resistance training. Yeah. We'll talk about why big muscles are big, strong muscles are a good thing to have. Really good. Any other adaptations your body might make to heavy resistance training? So if we think about doing a deadlift, for example, so picking a kind of heavy weight up off of the floor, if you did that for a number of weeks, would you say you would be better or worse at it after a number of weeks of doing the same thing?
Better.
You hope it was better.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we hope we would be. Yeah, so we're going to be
Unless you've
better
got
at
a
it.
crap technique to begin with.
Okay, cool. So you mentioned technique there, so that's an interesting one. Okay, so we think that changes over time as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the one that I was going to get at there. So yeah, perfect. So one of the reasons that we get better at it, we might have bigger, stronger muscles, and that's going to help. But we also probably learn to do it more efficiently. And more efficiently usually means better coordination. So we're kind of firing or our muscles are firing in a better unison. You know, we're firing more of the same muscle or more muscles all at the same time. It's a kind of better coordinated thing. Okay. If you look at youngsters learning to walk, for example, you notice that to start off with, they maybe already have the strength for it, but they just don't have the coordination of when to put what where, and then that develops quite quickly. So we get a neurological adaptation as well as a muscular one. Yeah. So our coordination is getting better. We're using more motor units, so that's all the little contractile units in your muscles. So we're kind of using more of those At the same time, we're using more of the same muscle group sometimes. That can be an adaptation that we make. So you might notice that you are significantly stronger after a very short period of training, and usually that's a neurological adaptation that your body's made to start off with. We're just learning to use our muscles in better coordination. We're using more of them.
Is that, do you get muscle memory, or is the stuff
Yeah.
too short to do that?
Yeah, so muscle memory is basically exactly what we're describing there. So
Right.
we use this example with the last group actually. So does anybody play a musical instrument?
We used to.
Used to? Cool. What did you play?
Viola.
Viola. Fantastic. Cool. So if you remember a tune that you used to play, I imagine whenever you pick it, I don't know how long ago was it you played viola?
Oh gosh, probably haven't picked it up for about 20 years now.
Yes. Okay, cool. So muscle memory may have forgotten by now,
Yeah,
but we would see. Okay. But see if you kind of picked it up at the time, you could probably play a tune straight off the bat without thinking about it too much. Okay. But then if it came to actually telling somebody else where to put your fingers and what string
yeah,
it was on,
yeah.
there wouldn't be something you would do without having to actually really think about it, or maybe actually play it and then see. Or those of you that type a code in to unlock your phone or to turn off your house alarm or something like that. If you think about what that code actually is, a lot of the time you're actually going to have to think about it, because when you put it in, you're not saying the numbers, you're just putting it in because you're used to where to put your finger at the time. Yeah. Or if I asked you to type without looking at the keyboard, you could probably all type out a few words, right? Without looking at the keyboard, you'd probably manage to do that. But then if I asked you to write down where every letter is on the keyboard, you probably would struggle. I know I would anyway. So your muscle memory is exactly that. It's kind of it's just a neurological thing, so that it's just everything kind of naturally firing in a coordinated way. And we all do this when we walk. How many of you are thinking about what muscle to fire at what time whenever you're walking? Yeah, we're just moving around, aren't we? Okay. Cool. Any other adaptations that you make to heavy resistance training?
Body's still working even after you finish training?
Say again, sorry?
Is it at all in terms of just how your body is still working even when you finish training?
Sure. So are you thinking about kind of like the metabolic response from having more that sort of thing? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that's something that comes with having more muscle, but then we're going to get a very kind of like systemic adaptation to that. So you're kind of more efficient and quicker metabolism and all that sort of thing is another adaptation, and that comes with having more muscle for sure. Yeah, definitely. Anything else? Think long term and think about a condition that affects more females than males, especially into slightly older age.
You're not thinking about, hang on. You're not thinking around osteoporosis and brittle bones, are you?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. What sort of adaptation do we reckon?
Strengthening the bones as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So heavy resistance training is one of the main or the main thing that we want to be doing. There are a few others to add to the mix, but it's the main thing that we want to be doing in order to, it can not only slow down osteoporosis, it can actually reverse osteoporosis. So we can make our bones significantly denser if we engage in heavy resistance training regularly, which is a really cool adaptation. So that is there's a trial, clinical trial called the Lift More trial. If you guys like to read, you can Google it and have a read of the whole trial. If you prefer just to watch like a little summary video, there's also one of those. If you go on YouTube and type in the Lift More trial, more spelled M-O-R, no E, then there's a little video and it just shows the sorts of exercises that the ladies were doing. So it took like a group of ladies of a certain age with osteoporosis, and it was just kind of showing the effects that various different methods of training had on these ladies. And yeah, really interesting. Definitely worth a little watch if you get a second. But yeah, it can actually reverse osteoporosis. You can physically make your bones denser by doing resistance training. That's another adaptation. Cool. So does that make sense now what I'm meaning by adaptation, guys? Yeah, fantastic. Good. Right, I'm very warm, so I'm going to take my sweater off. Okay. So whenever we talk about MED and MRD, these things are just little kind of concepts called your kind of minimum effective dose and your maximum recoverable dose. So MED, minimum effective dose, is the minimum amount of stress you need to expose yourself to in order to generate adaptation. So, for example, if most of you, Cheryl, only do this on your good arm for now, but if you reach up overhead like so, for me, okay, and back down again. Okay, so we've just used our delts, our triceps, maybe a little bit biceps for that shoulder flexion review, our kind of trapezius, all that sort of thing. Okay, but we can safely say that all of those muscle groups are not going to be stronger tomorrow or in the next couple of days as a result of us doing that one movement that you've just done in tonight's seminar, right? So we know that's below the minimum effective dose. We need to do something in order to make it more of an effective dose. What could we do? Say again, Cheryl?
Do the same exercise using weight.
Yeah, add weight to it. Absolutely. Yeah. So if we held a weight when doing that, that would introduce more stress. Yeah, absolutely. What else could we change?
Repetition.
Yeah, we could do more than one rep. Yeah. So we could do a few more reps, and that's going to be a little bit more of a dose. Yep, absolutely. And then we could do that a few times as well. Yeah, we could do a few sets of a few reps with a bit of weight. And now we're starting to approach something that might be effective in terms of making our muscles bigger and stronger. However, if we look at your rehab, Cheryl, at some point, because everything there will have a slightly lowered capacity for loading because of what you were telling about there with the kind of rotator cuff surgery, you probably find that doing that is absolutely enough for a minimum effective dose at some point during rehab, just because the capacity for loading is a little bit lower. So that would be enough, probably for a few repetitions, but still. And then that would gradually progress, and in order to keep pushing it on, as you get stronger, that final bullet point there, as you get stronger, minimum effective dose increases. So as that rotator cuff repairs, we start to get a little bit stronger, it starts to heal, we're going to need to do something more than just that in order to continue making it stronger and adapt more and all that sort of thing. Okay. So basic kind of concept that can be applied to both rehab and training, because it is effectively the same thing most of the time. We're just trying to elicit some sort of adaptation, and usually that is trying to improve function and increase muscle size, strength, all that sort of thing. Cool. Maximum recoverable dose is the maximum amount that you can do and still recover from. Okay, so if I asked you to do for the rest of this hour a weight in one hand, just lifting it up and down, okay, and as soon as you physically couldn't do another one, you stopped and you took 30-second break, and then you just did it again and again and again and again for the rest of the chat. I won't make you do that, but if I did, you can imagine that you'd be pretty broken by the end of the session. Okay, and then if I ask you to do it again tomorrow and the next day and the next day, probably what's going to happen first is we're not going to be able to lift as much, so our recovery won't be there. Okay, so we're not going to be able to lift as much. Our performance is going to reduce, and then we're probably going to start to get something really hurting at some point. We're going to start to get little injuries and things flaring up and all that sort of thing. Okay, so that would be training at above a maximum recoverable dose. So we need to train a little bit less than that in order to generate adaptation, but not mess ourselves up, essentially. Okay, so somewhere between these two thresholds is pretty much where we want to spend the majority of our time training. Anytime we're trying to drive adaptation, we want to be somewhere between there. Make sense? Yeah, fantastic. Good. Okay, and yeah, progressive overload is basically just the process of gradually making things harder. Okay, so if I gave my maximum bench to the world's strongest man, that's probably not going to be enough if he does that a couple of times, right? That's not going to be enough to make him stronger. In fact, if he probably just did that, every time he did a bench session, he'd actually probably get weaker because he's not lifting enough to make him stronger or to maintain his strength. Okay, whereas if I gave that to somebody who is perhaps not quite at, or someone roughly around kind of my level, or maybe a little bit above my level, it's still going to be a more meaningful load to them. So it's going to be somewhere in and around an appropriate dose for them. Okay, so it's just about kind of matching your capabilities to what you're doing. Okay, so usually throughout a kind of training block, so we usually do roughly the same thing for a period of time, and usually we do the same thing each week for roughly about 6 weeks. Now, there's all sorts of variables within that, but pretty much as a general summary, that's what a kind of training block looks like. And then we change it up. Who was suggesting changing things up? Remind me, sorry.
Me.
Yourself, Cheryl. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we want to do the same thing for long enough that we can actually measure progress in it. But then we do want to change things up, usually minimally. So we often don't have to change too much. Sometimes it could just be the number of reps that we're doing. We can maybe just drop that down a little bit, stick with the same exercise. Sometimes we change the exercise slightly, like doing a normal grip pull down to a hammer grip pull down or something like that. So it could be little changes, but every now and again we'll change it up, and then we'll do that for the following 6 weeks, and we measure progress. So this is what kind of standard training and training blocks tend to look like. And pretty much what we want to do is start your training block somewhere around your kind of minimum effective dose, so the minimum amount you need in order to get better at the stuff you're doing, and then apply progressive overload to it. So we gradually do a little bit more throughout the block, and we kind of push ourselves all the way to the kind of maximum recoverable dose or just below that. Okay, that's pretty much training in a nutshell, what it kind of looks like. Okay, and we'll have a little bit of a chat through a bit more about what this is exactly. Okay, any questions? Make sense as concept? Cool. I'll fly through this slide here, guys. So minimum effective dose sounds nice, sounds easy, sounds like not very hard training, but minimum effective dose, we're talking about a dose that is enough stress in order to persuade your body to adapt and generate new muscle tissue, or make your muscles stronger, make your bones denser. We're talking about some quite significant changes there. So we need to give your body an exceptionally good reason. We've just discussed there that just doing that probably isn't a good enough reason. So we need to do a little bit more, but it is quite significantly more than that. Okay, so your muscles have got a very high energy demand. Okay, that's one of the reasons that we want them, for that metabolic response. Yep, so they are burning lots of energy just by being there. If you're asleep and you've got more muscle than a version of you with less muscle, you'll be burning more calories. Yeah, even while you're asleep, they're just there costing energy, which is a good thing, makes your metabolism more effective. But with that in mind, if you're on a caloric deficit, so for example, if we're trying to lose weight and we're on a calorie deficit, or even if not, because your muscles have such a high cost, if your body thinks for whatever reason that it might not really need them, it will get rid of them very quickly. Okay, so in order to hang on to our muscles, or in order to develop our muscles, we need to give your body an exceptionally good reason. Okay, and that is to work reasonably hard, reasonably frequently. So minimum effective dose still requires you to be pushing outside of comfort zones, pretty much by definition. Now, this statement at the bottom is both anecdotal through my own experience training people from all sorts of different levels. So this is beginners, people who've never been in a gym before in their lives, all the way to kind of Commonwealth Games competitors. The vast majority of people who are struggling to get results, they tend to err on the side of perhaps not pushing quite hard enough. Okay, or consistently enough. So that's both anecdotally, and there's also some interesting research which we'll chat about in a couple of slides time, which is pretty much making the same point. So it's not completely out of nowhere that we're just saying that. Now, it's not everybody. I do have to rein some people back. Some people push a little bit too hard, and we have to pull these people back a little bit. But generally speaking, I think if you were to sum up people that don't push hard enough and people that push too hard, if you were just to compare those two groups, people that push too hard too regularly, whilst they perhaps take a little bit more risk with training, they do tend to get quicker results than those who don't push hard enough. So I'm not telling you to necessarily be in that camp, but it does just kind of back up what we're saying here to an extent. Okay, so generally speaking, if we're not getting results, we're not pushing ourselves hard enough. There's lots of other reasons that it could be, but that's a very common one. Make sense? Cool. So we've got, what was that beep? Am I all right? Can you see my screen? Yeah, all good.
Yeah.
So you'll see it. Yeah, cool. I was just checking it wasn't my my screen share dying or something like that. Okay, so we've got a little study here, American College Sports Medicine. You can look up this study if you're interested. You don't have to, but it is very clear how it kind of lays everything out for you in terms of how many reps to do, how much intensity you need, and it is all based off of lots and lots of research that's been done in the past. It's a big kind of review of literature. It's a little bit old now, but there's not been much else that's come out since that said anything different. So old doesn't necessarily mean bad when it comes to research. 2011 being old, that's mad, isn't it? But there we go. So we've got here a recommendation to lift somewhere between 60 and 80% of your 1RM. Okay, so 1RM, anybody know what that stands for?
Is that 1 rep max?
Yes, absolutely, yeah. Do you know what 1 rep max is, Anne-Marie, sorry?
It's the maximum you can lift for 1 rep.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I wasn't trying to trick you there. Yeah, you're spot on. So it is the maximum amount of weight that you can lift for a single repetition. Okay. Now, I know that is probably bringing up more questions than answers in your head based off of what's on the screen, and I will answer them soon. Don't worry, we'll tackle that. Okay, because I'm not going to suggest that you go and max out on everything, just so you know what your 1 repetition maximum is in order to tackle training. It just tends to be in literature how intensity is written down, like this is how heavy you should go. And I don't think that's that useful, because if I said to you, all right, guys, cool, go and train. And by the way, this same study says 2 to 4 sets of 8 to 12 reps, and usually hitting the same muscle group once every kind of 48 to 72 hours. Okay, so that's basically everything that you need to know in order to how to make a muscle bigger and stronger. So if I said, right, okay, cool, that kind of means roughly 3 sets of 10, 2 to 3 times per week, at 60 to 80% of your 1RM, off you go. You wouldn't really know what to do there, right? You'd be like, how much weight is that though, right? So it's not clear, although it is clear in terms of like we all understand what it means. It's still not very actionable, maybe is a better word for it. So hopefully I can make it actionable for you tonight, guys. So beginners don't require as much. If you're newer to it, you don't need to work quite as hard as people that have been doing it for a while, and that kind of makes sense, right? That goes along with what we were saying, which is minimum effective dose increasing the stronger you get and the more trained you become. Okay, so it's still within that kind of that range, but it's at the lower end of that range. And then experienced lifters often working 80% 1RM and plus. When we do start to get a little bit more experienced, for the vast majority of strength gains, we are working above 80% a lot of the time. Okay. So this is the study that we were chatting about. So a little kind of review of literature, and it's just looking at essentially what people would tend to choose in terms of lifting intensity if they're given a little bit of freedom. And people tend to select weights roughly around 53% of 1RM. And we know that that is a good chunk below what literature says you should be choosing in order to generate the adaptation that we want of robust gains in strength and hypertrophy. Hypertrophy means muscle size gain, essentially. So it's a big study that says people don't work hard enough, basically. Does that make sense? I'll give you a chance just to have a little bit of a read through of everything in that slide there.
Makes sense. And alarmingly so, actually, because up until recently, PT that I've used in the gym, and I've known for sort of 5 years or more, he would do a session with me periodically where we would just work on that, and he'd walk me through the kit and then say, right, do 1 rep that's if it's set a load and said, is that your max, is that 100, to define where to get to. What he would look for was about 50% of that rep, and then set me three sets to then complete of that exercise. So that's what we're basically talking about here, isn't it?
Yeah, essentially that is exactly what we're talking about.
But what he would do, and knowing me probably far better than, but that's a bit alarming, because he'd always set it around about 50-ish% of what the full rep that I could do. So what we're saying here is I probably should have been aiming higher than that, more sort of, as you say, sort of 60-70% or so.
Potentially, yeah, in terms of generating adaptation. However, what it is saying here as well is that that might be sufficient. So that's what it's saying there. Okay, so around about that percentage, coupled with low to medium number of repetitions, so 5 to 15, can sufficiently stimulate hypertrophy and increase strength for novices. So if we were a bit newer to it, that could have been absolutely appropriate at the time.
But he knew I was far less than a novice working through it. So yeah, that's interesting. That is.
Yeah, so no, if we've been doing it for a while, then I would definitely be looking to work people a little bit harder. But the other thing to kind of add to that is we can't test 1RMs on everything. And it's also it's not we don't get much from testing 1RMs other than finding out what our 1RM is, and that can be useful for setting parameters. And it can be useful, obviously, if you're in a competition of how much you can lift. But it's something where you're kind of flirting with your tissue's maximum capacity for loading, which is not always the safest thing to do. Sometimes it is completely perfectly safe to find a max, and it depends on the individual and the exercise and all these sorts of things. But a lot of the time, I wouldn't recommend people go and kind of max out in order to find this. So tonight we'll have a chat through about a different way of doing things that should hopefully give you guys a little bit of an idea of how to figure out how to get within your kind of 60 to 80% 1RM without actually going through that process of maxing out first and then going off of percentages of it. Okay. Cool. So any questions there, guys? Shall I move you on? No, all good. Cool. So this is kind of answering, sorry for my my squeaky chair there, guys, every time I shift. By the way, that should tell you how many times you should shift and move about, right? If you hear every time my chair squeaks, right, your best posture is your next posture, they say. So moving about regularly is a good thing, but I do apologize for my squeaky chair. I need a new one. Okay, so we can't or shouldn't always test 1RM. So what should we do? We usually think about proximity to failure. Okay, so how close are we to not being able to do another repetition? And that's another really good gauge of how hard we're working. Okay, it does require a little bit of a subjective measurement, so you do have to ask yourself, how hard do I think I'm working in that, or how many more reps do I think I could have done? But it does allow you to put a number on it. Okay, so instead of saying that was a really hard set, you say that set was 2 RIR, for example. Okay, and I'll talk you through this. So RIR stands for what? Anybody, any ideas? Anyone seen that before?
Do you want me to say?
Yes, please.
Reps in reserve.
Perfect. Yeah. And have you got the other one there as well?
Yeah. Rate of perceived exertion.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So RPE, rate of perceived exertion, and RIR, reps in reserve. So rate of perceived exertion is how hard you feel you're working, and RIR is how many more reps you feel you could have done. Okay, so quite similar measurements. RPE is a scale of 1 to 10, and the difference between the RPE number and 10 is your RIR, is the number of reps you should leave in the tank. Okay, so difference between 8 and 10 is what? 2. Yeah, I'm not trying to trick you, I promise. Yeah, so difference between 8 and 10 is 2. Okay, so just follow that chart along. Okay, that means 2 reps in reserve, which kind of begs the question, why is RPE there in the first place? And we'll chat about that shortly. Okay, so RIR is what we're going to kind of chat through now, because I think it's a little bit more useful when it comes to lifting, and they mean exactly the same thing when it comes to lifting. With RIR, you just skip a little bit of kind of mental math, essentially. Cool. Can you guys all see my screen? I keep hearing a little beep. Is that a chat? Because I can't see that at the moment, just in case anyone's asking questions in the chat.
We can see it.
No, yeah. Perfect. Fantastic. Okay. So RIR, reps in reserve. Okay, so how many reps have you got in the tank? So can somebody give me who's done a resistance training session relatively recently that they can remember?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. And give me an example of one of the exercises that you did.
I did where you lift the weights out in front of you.
Cool.
Can't remember what its actually proper name.
That's okay. Were you lying down? Were you stood up?
No, I was stood up.
Stood
So
up.
I had them, and then you like lift them up like that, and then you lower them again.
Pulling up like this?
No, with straight arms.
Or with straight arms? So a front raise you were doing?
Yes.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so dumbbell?
Yeah.
Perfect. How many reps did you do?
I think 12.
12. Cool. And how much weight were you using?
2 kilograms.
2 kilos. Cool. It's a tough exercise, right? It's a long lever, so it's not an easy thing at all to lift a lot of weight on. Okay, so the higher it gets, the harder it gets because the lever gets longer. There's more axial loading. Cool. So if I told you to keep going at the end of the set, how many more reps could you have done?
So the first one I probably could have done some more, but at the time I got to the end, I was actually really struggling on the third set.
Okay, so let's talk about set number 1. How many more
Yeah.
reps there? So if I told you at the end of your set of 12, with your 2 kilos on a front raise, if I told you to keep going, how many more would you have got to?
Probably 2.
A couple more?
Yeah.
Yep. And if you'd tried a third extra one, you just wouldn't have moved.
No.
Nope. Perfect. So you were working at 2 reps in reserve, or RPE 8. Yeah, so both these things mean the same, which is could do 2 more reps. Okay. Does that make sense, guys? Yeah, cool. So if I then asked you to do a set of 12, but at 5 reps in reserve, what would you then do?
Instead of 12, I would do 7.
Or if I asked you to do a set of 12.
Oh, right. Sorry, because I
do
was
it
saying I could do 14. So if you said 5, I would do 9. Is that what you're saying?
So I'm asking you what kind of weight you would use. So for example, if I told you to do that exact session there, so if I said go do 12 reps at 2 RIR, you would select 2 kilos for that, as you've told me
Yeah.
there. Yeah. So if I said go do a set of 12 again, but this time I want it at 5 RIR, you would select a lighter weight in order to get 5 reps in reserve at the end.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
That makes sense. So if you had a lighter weight for that set,
Yeah.
I asked you at the end of the 12 reps, if I asked you to keep going, you'd be able to do more reps because it's lighter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah.
Why? Because obviously most of the time with our plans and things, we've got X amount of reps with so I don't know, three lots of 12, for example. Why wouldn't you do, if you got 5 more in the tank, why wouldn't you do, I don't know, 12, 17? Why do you stop at a certain number and do more sets? Because in all this time, and I should know by now, I'm never quite clear as to why you work that way, knowing that you think you've got X amount of reps in the tank still.
Okay. So basically that's what tonight's kind of chat is about, which is like how hard should it be? Okay, so you're saying why should you not work to complete failure every single set all the time?
Yeah. Effectively, yeah.
Because you don't have to, as literature shows. So you can still make robust gains in strength and hypertrophy working at 60 to 80% 1RM, and that means leaving reps in the tank, and we'll have a look at that based off of next slide of kind of why that's the case. But we don't have to. We can generate adaptation. We can get a minimum effective dose without working to failure. So why would we play every card in our hand immediately at the start of every block? If that makes sense.
I find I have to pace myself, because if I did that on the first set, I would then probably really struggle on the second set, and the third set, I probably wouldn't be able to do anything.
Sure. So there's an element of kind of building up fatigue and that sort of thing as well. But sometimes we will be doing that. So towards the end of a block, we will be going close to failure on nearly everything. And when that's the case, if I said do 3 sets to failure and I want that to be roughly 12 reps, you'd say, right, okay, I'm probably going to do like 2.5 kilos, assuming you had access to a 2.5 kilo weight. I'll do 2.5 kilos for set number 1. And that'll probably, I'll hit failure around 12. I'm going to be knackered after doing that. So I'm going to have to drop to 2 kilos in order to do the same number of reps again. I'll be knackered after that. I'm going to have to drop to 1.5 after that. So 100% fatigue accumulation throughout sets is a thing, and something that you would have to take into account if you were programmed like 3 sets of 12 at 0 reps left in the tank. You might have to think about that as you go through. But in terms of the reps that we do, recommendation is kind of 8 to 12. To be honest, anywhere between about 6 and 15, or sometimes even like 6 and 20, you're still within a kind of rep range that is appropriate for strength and hypertrophy gains. Generally speaking, I would do somewhere more between your 6 and 15 for the most part. And so long as we're working at intensities that we've just kind of seen there, or that I'll show you on the next slide, we know that's enough to generate adaptation, and we know that's kind of appropriate rep ranges. So, for example, Cheryl, if you did go on and do your 17 reps, it's not saying that wouldn't work. It still would work. It's still, if you did work to failure and you did the extra reps, it's definitely still going to be eliciting quite a lot of stress, and therefore hopefully adaptation. So it is still going to work, but it's just that we don't have to do it all the time. And if we do that at the
sense as well, actually, because what I've just thought of as you were explaining that is sometimes my gym PT, what he will do is give me a set, however many sets, say it's the dumbbells, but he'll put 3 or 4 different sets in front of me. Say, right, when you feel as though you need to drop, you don't drop the sets, you carry on, but you can drop the weight. You can drop to a lower weight, but don't stop doing your reps. Just move to the next weight. If you need to drop the weight, but we start off at the high weight.
Okay, so he's even doing what's called a drop set with you, which is like an intensification set. So this is the sort of thing. So kind of working to failure and doing things like that, which is a drop set, which is really nasty when you do them, but you get a good kind of muscle pump from them, a good stimulus. Okay, so when you do a drop set, you basically do as many reps as you can at a given weight, and then you drop the weight a little bit and keep going, drop the weight a little bit and keep going. And it's as nasty as it sounds. That's the sort of thing that we don't need to do in order to generate adaptation. And think about how I don't know what exercise you do that on, but think about how those muscles feel the next day after you've done something like that. Is pretty cooked a lot of the time, right? Unless we're extremely used to doing it. You'll feel a lot of kind of muscle soreness and a lot of fatigue building up from that. So one of the reasons that we don't work to failure is because we want to continue progressing week after week after week. And if we start the first week of the block and we just go absolutely, if we go super, super hard in that session, you will probably find that the accumulated fatigue from the different sessions puts you into a point where you're struggling to kind of recover from everything that you're doing, and you probably have to stop and deload for a little while in order to recover before keeping on going. So sometimes doing too much can actually accumulate fatigue too quickly and prevent you from just carrying out momentum throughout a whole block of training. So that's kind of another reason why we might not want to be doing muscular failure all the time. So again, you might be one of those people who I might be reeling back, which are more rare than the people who I'm kind of pushing on and saying to lift a little bit more weight. But yeah, there's definitely kind of 2 ends of that.
The shoulder's been reeling me back for long enough, so
that'll get you. Yeah, that'll do it. Yeah.
And hence the reason for actually jumping in and finally getting the surgery this year. So anyway, sorry, I'm interrupting.
No.
The other thing I worry about is if I keep going until failure, I start to find that as I get near to failure, I lose my form. And therefore I feel like I'm more prone to injury because I can't do them properly.
Absolutely, yeah. So whenever we start to lose technique, that's an issue because our technique is essentially the kind of foundation of why we're doing what we're doing. Okay, but we need to think about what boxes we're trying to tick with the exercise. So if you're talking about a really big, heavy movement like a squat, for example, or a deadlift, if, for example, one of the many muscle groups that are involved in that is knackered after a few reps and it's just not able to do anymore, that's going to alter your technique, and we're going to start to lift it less efficiently. We're perhaps going to start to move in movement patterns that we're not used to, and this is when dodgy things start to happen. So we don't want that. We want to try and keep everything nice and efficient. because we want to build the skill of lifting things efficiently. And we also don't want to move in ways we're not used to, because if we do something that we're not used to, this is when we're exposing tissues to loads that they don't have the capacity for. That's where injuries start to happen. So you're 100% right. We want to be cautious with that. However, if we're doing a bicep curl, I think a lot of people would have the tendency to think whenever they start kind of, maybe cheating a little bit on the way up, kind of like leaning back, maybe throwing it a little bit on the way up, that sort of thing. A lot of people would say, okay, right, that's time to stop. But I think in that case, why are you doing a bicep curl? You're trying to stress out your bicep, right? You're trying to induce a lot of stress to your bicep. So at that point, if you cheat a little bit to get it up, so long as we're coming down nice and slowly, we're going through that good full range of motion, we're still going to be inducing a lot of stress into that bicep. It's going to get a really good muscle stimulus still. And we're not necessarily going to be putting ourselves at a significant injury risk, because we know that working to failure on bicep curls does not have a big incidence of injuries. And we also know that the amount of weight that we can bicep curl is not very much weight when we look at how much weight our bodies could actually handle. So probably going to struggle to injure ourselves by leaning back a little bit whenever we're doing a bicep curl. So we have to think about, yes, we might be losing a little bit of a specific technique, but are we ticking the boxes we want to tick with the exercise? And if we are, we're okay to keep going. If we're not, there's a good reason to stop. Or if we're at any risk of something happening, it's a good reason to stop. But in a bicep curl, we're at a pretty low risk of something happening there. Yeah, especially if we're used to it.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no worries.
Could I ask a question about that? See a bicep curl like with the barbell. I mean, I can do a 10. Like I do go to failure with a 10. But see, when you do a kind of a bicep curl with the rope, I mean, I have to really drop down to 2.5. Why is that? Is that?
Yep. So when you're doing it with a rope, I'm assuming you're on a cable machine?
Cable machine, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So when we're on a cable machine, the same laws don't apply. So if it says it is X number of kilos, that's meaningless beyond that one specific machine. So you can literally say on that machine it's at 5, and the next week I've put it at 6 on that same machine. Therefore, I've done more than I did last week. But when we start to get pulleys involved, then the amount of actual tension that's going through the rope can't be like quantified. So you can't say, I can do, for example, let's say you do 10 kilos for 10 reps on a cable machine. You can't say that I curl 10 kilos for 10 reps on a cable machine, because on some cable machines, you'll be able to curl the one that says 20. And then on others, you'll struggle with the one that says 5, because it massively depends on the machine itself. So whilst those plates might weigh what they say they weigh, there's all sorts of leverage involved in actually shifting it. And you'll actually notice that, because a lot of the time when you move your arm, again with the cable, the weight only moves this much, but your arm moves this much. And that's when you know there's a lot of pulleys involved, and it's quite a light, easy cable machine. If you move your arm this much and the weight moves loads, you know it's going to be a much harder machine. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I just always wondered why it was just so different.
That'll be why. And also different exercises load the muscles in different ways, and sometimes it puts us in a less advantageous position. But if your biceps are knackered, then we're doing something good for them. So as long as that box is ticked, So complex looking slide, it's not as complex as it looks though. So if we have a look at this, can you guys think of a tough set of 10 that you've done recently? Anybody done a set of 10 with something recently? Hands up if that's you.
Probably the upper was.
A set of 10, Cheryl, yeah. Tell me what weight you lifted.
I was probably well, the deadlift I could lift about 45.
45, fantastic, cool. So on the deadlift, you were lifting 45 kilos for 10 reps. And again, if I asked you to keep going at the end of that set, how many more reps do you feel you could have done?
Probably at a push about another 2 or 3.
2 or 3, okay, cool. So we did 10 reps and we've done like 2 to 3 reps in reserve there. So that means if we follow that along, that you were somewhere between kind of 65 to 68% 1RM. Okay, so if we were to, let me cancel that. So if we were to then divide 45 by 68 times by 100, that would mean that 1 RM for you, based off of what you've assumed there, would be roughly around the kind of 65, 66 kilo mark for a 1 repetition maximum.
Interesting.
Yeah. So is that roughly where you think it might have been at the time?
Don't think I've ever lifted 60 off the floor.
No, cool. Well, based off of what you're telling me, if you're doing 10 reps with 45, I would
Yeah,
hazard a guess that
I
you'd.
could let you, we were normally doing sets of 10 to 12.
Okay.
So
I would say you would definitely shift 60 plus kilos off the floor there, no bother. Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
Sometimes I think it's psychological as well, isn't it? Like, I can't
oh,
lift that.
yeah, there's a big element of that for sure. Yeah. Cool. So we can see all of these chunks here, right? Everything kind of from here onwards in this half, that's kind of within that range that we're saying 60 to 80%. Okay. Now, most of the reps that we do, okay, so we know we want to be doing somewhere between kind of like maybe 8 and 12, something like that. I know we said bigger ranges before, but just for the sake of easy math, we're probably going to be somewhere around here. All of those percentages are kind of marrying up with what we said before. So to summarize that, pretty much every set that you do, if we're trying to drive adaptation with it, with the training that we're doing, it wants to feel pretty damn hard. It wants to feel like we've only got somewhere between 4 and 0 reps left in the tank whenever we're doing that set. Okay. Now, there can be certain things that would mean that we would perhaps take it a little bit easier, and that might be if we're extremely new to the exercise or new to training in general, or if we've got an injury, in which case, if you've got an injury, you're probably going to be using pain as the guideline for how much you should be lifting, as opposed to thinking about, how many reps you've got left in the tank and that sort of thing as well. But as a general guideline, what that means is that we should feel at the end of the majority of sets that we do, as part of the training that we're doing in order to generate adaptation and change and get bigger and stronger and all the rest of it, it should feel that you've only got somewhere between 4 and 0 reps left in the tank. Yeah. So to summarize even simpler than that, just work pretty hard all the time in your training. And every now and again, when you get reasonably knackered, take a slightly easier week, let the fatigue dissipate, and then crack on. Yeah. If we notice our performance dipping down week by week, okay, then we know that we're probably doing a bit too much and we're going above our maximum recoverable dose, whether it's too many sets, too much weight, if we're doing too much in general, too big a dose in general, too much frequency, all that sort of thing, you'll notice performance dipping down. You'll notice that you're feeling little niggles cropping up, all these sorts of things. That's a good indicator. We need to take the foot off the gas a little bit before continuing to push on. Okay. Cool. By the way, Cheryl, so your kind of 60 to 80%, that is kind of based off of an 8 to 12 kind of rep range. So if, for example, if you were doing many more reps than that, then perhaps something more around 50% could have been more appropriate for that on there. I think it was leg press you were chatting about with your PT there.
Yeah, I mean, I'd normally be with him 3-4 times a week, and about my own sessions about another 2, which he would alternate what we were doing each session of the week. So it wasn't as though we were doing that every session.
Okay, no worries. No worries. Cool. Well, a good thing to maybe take away from it then is like the intensity things, and then also doing the same thing again and again and again is a really good thing to do. There is something behind keep the body guessing, but not to that kind of extent. So we want to do the same things in order to measure progress, essentially, again and again. So it's this is where we find differences between exercising and training. And I think both are exceptionally good. So sometimes it's nice just to go and improvise a session and just have a little bit of fun and do something different, that sort of thing. And that keeps it interesting. And there's nothing wrong with that. And we'll get results from that and it will be absolutely grand. But if we want to be a little bit more methodical with our progress, then if we're kind of doing more training, which is like thinking about doing the same things again and again and again, this is how we start to get better and really generate a good kind of solid adaptation. So if we think about somebody who played tennis one week, played badminton the next week, played squash the next week, played ping pong the next week, and just did that like alternating, overall, they're probably going to get pretty good hand-eye coordination. They're going to get pretty good at all of those sports. But if somebody just did badminton every week, they're going to be exceptionally good at badminton because they're doing the one thing again and again and again. So it is just thinking about that sort of thing as well. Cool. So 4-week block example. I'll just fly through this, guys. We don't have too much left. Some exercises is what we were chatting about before there, and so some exercises like your squats, your deadlift, that sort of thing, so your bigger, heavier movements. We probably don't want to be pushing quite as close to failure as we would something that's kind of smaller muscle groups or less muscle groups involved, such as a bicep curl. Muscle groups that recover quicker and easier, and there's less to think about with your technique. It's a less complex movement. So bigger, heavier, more complex movements, we leave more reps in the tank. So for example, somewhere around 4, so strength development movements, I'm calling them. So somewhere like 4 reps in the tank to start off the block. Accessories, 2 or 3 reps in the tank. So accessories is everything else, all of the easier stuff that we're talking about. Okay, and then we gradually make both of those harder and leave less reps in the tank progressively throughout the block relative to where it started. Okay, so we're finishing that 4 weeks, leaving maybe 2 reps in the tank on your strength development movements, maybe leaving 0 to 1 reps in the tank on your accessories. Or if you're feeling really up for it, as Cheryl was describing there, you can do some drop sets, which is where we're actually pushing past the point of failure, because you're failing and then dropping the weight and failing again, dropping the weight and failing again. So if you really want to be mean to yourself, you can do that sort of thing, and it can be quite a nice one to drive a little bit more adaptation. But I would save these sorts of intensification sets towards the end of a block. There's another really nasty one that you can do. I actually hate this one. It's a love-hate relationship, I would say, but I hate it more than drop sets even, which is where you would kind of do your first set, you do an AMRAP, so you do as many reps as you could. So say you manage like 11 reps with X amount of kilos. And then you say, right, I'm going to hit 11 reps with the same amount of kilos on every subsequent set. So let's say you do 3 more sets after that. You'll probably hit failure, as Anne-Marie was describing. You'll probably hit failure halfway through that set because you're already knackered from doing as many reps as you can. So you hit failure, you stop for about 5 seconds, and then you go again. You probably hit failure after a rep or 2, and you stop for a second, then you go again until you hit that 11 reps. So it's called myo reps. So it's a really nasty one, or rest pause. So you set yourself a target of number of reps and you hit it no matter what, and you give yourself a little break in between. So there's all these sorts of things that you can do to really drive adaptation if you're struggling, but ultimately we don't have to do it in order to make gains. Certainly not to start off with, certainly not when we're newer to training. So it can be stuff that we do for a bit of fun, or later on down the line, it can be useful just to kind of drive a little bit of extra stimulus through the muscle.
Sounds to me the sort of thing Alex would challenge himself to.
Yeah, as Alex's coach, I've challenged him to that many's a time in his program. So yeah, you just tell me what you want me to get him with, and I'll sort them out. That's not a problem. Yeah. Okay, so let's have a look, guys. Go. So RPE, just quickly, we chatted about that before, and we kind of think, what's the point in it? Because we just use RAR really, and whenever we think about RPE, we turn it into RAR in our heads before we apply it to what we do. So why does it exist? Originally, it was for cardio stuff. So it was Borg's rating of perceived exertion, and it was for runners. So effectively, it was a scale of 6 to 20, and if you times that number by 10, that would equal what your heart rate should be at the time. So if somebody told you to go and do like work at RPE 15 for 10 minutes, that should feel hard, and that should be roughly 150 BPM. Yeah, RPE 15, 150 BPM kind of heart rate. So that's what it was for originally. Then it was adapted for lifting, and then instead it wasn't really quite precise enough for lifting, because it was like, because obviously it was a scale of kind of 1 to 10 instead of 6 to 20, and it wasn't really that precise. So then it's kind of turned into like proximity to failure, which is when it just turned into reps in reserve. So that's why it's even a thing. But some people still use RPE instead of RIR. It's exactly the same thing. It's just putting a number on how hard you felt it was. Okay, so this is a set of bicep curls that I did recently in my training. So you can have a little look through, and you can tell me at the end if you think I've got anything left in the tank, or if you think that's me kaput. So we can have a look at what training kind of looks like, or what different RIR actually looks like when it's happening. Okay, so we're on a bicep curl machine there. Please ignore my gym faces. Okay. So at the end of the set there, what do we reckon?
I think you can do more.
Thank you.
2.
Appreciate it. 2. Yeah,
2.
cool. Couple reps.
4.
4. Thank you, Anne-Marie. I appreciate your faith in me.
Two.
You're thinking 2, yeah, cool. So what we'll do is look at that set continued in theory. So that's that set continued from that point. We'll see how many we get. Cool.
4.
So at that point, that was pretty much me. Okay, so based off of that, we're thinking kind of, I think the first rep of that was the last rep of the kind of the previous slide there. So it was about 3. So you're all in kind of the right ballpark there. Okay. Now what we know is that we should be kind of like 3-4 reps left in the tank most of the time. Okay, which means that pretty much the easiest your training should look like when you're trying to drive adaptation after you've kind of spent a little bit of time just getting used to training, because we know beginners don't need quite as much. But after we're like a little bit more seasoned, a little bit more kind of used to it, most of your training, bear in mind, I'm trying to move this as strong and as fast as I can towards the end on the way up, control on the way down, move strong towards the top. Okay. If we watch the end of the video, this is roughly the easiest that training should look like. If you can keep your face composed, then you're doing much better than me. But that's about as easy as things should look like if we're working hard enough in order to drive that kind of adaptation. Okay, much less than that, and we kind of running the risk of taking ourselves to the gym and not doing enough to generate adaptation, which we don't want to do. Okay, so example of kind of heavy compound lift. So this was about kind of 5 reps in reserve, and we know that we can work with lots more reps in reserve when it comes to just kind of like lower reps, heavier weights. So I did 3 reps here in total. Okay, and that's about 5-6 reps left in reserve there. Okay, so even 5 or 6 reps left in reserve when it's a big heavy compound movement like that, we're still working pretty hard. I'm still having to kind of exert quite a lot of force in order to shift that weight there. Okay, so it's still not particularly easy. Yeah. But much more could go wrong with a squat. So this is why we don't take ourselves often to the point of failure. And obviously, the more skillful you are, and sometimes just how you're built can actually help with it. We can sometimes work closer to failure on squats. Some people can work closer to failure on squats than other people can, safely. It just depends on how you're put together and how skillful you are. Okay. Cool. And then this is a little bit of an example. So we've got some dumbbell chest press here. So it's a bit of an example of how training to failure can look a little bit different for different people, or even a little bit different for different muscle groups. Okay, so tend to be quite kind of fast twitch muscles in kind of chest and triceps tend to be quite explosive, which is good when it comes to moving heavy weights quickly, but it's less good when it comes to kind of endurance and that sort of thing. So you'll notice as soon as it slows down a little bit, that's kind of me done at that point, even though I try to do another rep. So we'll let you watch the set. Okay, we'll breather. Okay, so I think we're a little bit slower on this one. Yeah, it's a little bit of a grind on that one. And then we go for the next one and it's just kaput. So we ended the set there. Okay, so it looks a bit different. Some people are much better at kind of grinding reps out than others, and those people tend to probably be less explosive in general. So it's there's pros and cons. Female lifters tend to be much better at kind of grinding reps out at higher percentages than male lifters a lot of the time for that reason. So generally speaking, slightly the kind of distribution of muscle fiber is different. So it tends to be less fast twitch, which means that if you guys were to take 90% of your 1 rep max, you could probably do far more repetitions with it than I could do with 90% of my 1 rep max. So it is just kind of just little differences there. Now it's obviously this is a generalized statement, and everybody is slightly different, but that's the kind of the pattern that we tend to see. Cool. So work reasonably hard most of the time, guys. Don't work so hard that you get niggles and that sort of thing and your performance goes down. If that is happening, take a little bit of an easier week and then keep going. Basically is a summary of what we've just been through. Any questions?
Sorry, can I just ask a quick question? I haven't sent any videos to you for ages and I've forgotten. Do we send them on WhatsApp now?
Yeah, just on WhatsApp. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You've got my number for that, yeah?
I don't know, but I'll have a look. I think I asked Rab for it ages ago, but I just didn't know where to look, so I'll go and have a look.
No problem. If you haven't got it, just message Rab and he'll send it through. And if he hasn't got it, then get him to message me and I'll send it to him to send to you.
Okay,
we'll get it.
Thank you.
Cool. He may not have it, by the way, because it's he can message me. I think he's got my kind of personal number, but the one that I use for all the kind of TSD videos is a different one. So that's why we'd have to kind of go through that little chain if he hasn't got it.
Okay.
But I think you should have it somewhere. Cool. Any more questions, guys? No. Do we all feel a little bit more equipped to manage training intensities?
Yeah.
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 So I'm conscious, as I think you keep telling me I don't push myself hard enough, so I do need to work on that.
Okay, yeah, cool. Yeah, hopefully this is it's always nice to see like some little examples and that sort of thing and some ideas of kind of training intensities. Yeah, hopefully that helps. Great stuff, guys. Good. So any questions, pop them through to me on WhatsApp, and I shall see you this time next week.
See you next week.
Thank you.
Right. Cheers,
Bye-bye.
guys. Have a good one.
Bye.
Good evening.